So I just read Haruki Murakami's 1Q84, not IQ84, title of my autobiography. 1Q84. For whatever reason, that title's very strange to me. It's a really big book. It's one of the biggest books I've ever read. This version's split into three different sort of volumes. The text itself is split into three parts, so that kind of makes sense, but it is all one big book. It's something like almost 1,200 pages. So I have read other Murakami's before. This is, of course, his biggest one, and so obviously the biggest one I've ever read. It's also one of the more recent ones that he's published. So this one was published in 2010. There's only one other book that I've read of his since then. So, but I enjoyed it as much as I enjoy other Murakami books. It's not my favorite, but there's just something about his writing that I just find really, I use the word cozy, but it's just so easy to read, even though it's like an English translation of the works. It doesn't take much of my sort of, I don't want to say attention. It's not like a dumb popcorn movie where you can sit and turn off your brain, but it does, I don't know, it's just easy to read, great imagery, sort of puts you in these sort of weird places. So Murakami always writes sort of magical realism. I say always. He usually writes magical realism. So we're set in the world, but something really weird and illogical is going on, and that is definitely the case in this book as well. So the whole book sort of is, I guess, a love story between these two people, Tengo and Aomame. So Tengo and Aomame, they knew each other when they were 10 in elementary school, and then they haven't seen each other in the past 20 years. This book is sort of them finding each other and coming together and realizing that they had sort of needed each other or been in love, whatever, for this whole time. So that part of the book's really, really cool. And especially the final third of the book, there's so many near misses and coincidental almost meetings, but they never quite meet. And there's a real tension, like, when are they finally going to meet? When are they finally going to see each other after 20 years? I guess that's sort of the overarching plot, and I thought that was really well done. But of course, it's a Murakami novel, so it has to have a very weird twist to it. And the twist involves cults and other worlds and these strange godlike fairy people beings that it's a lot, and it's illogical. There is no way to make total sense of it, which I think is fine. It's a Murakami novel. It's magical realism. You don't need sort of logic as long as there's an internal consistency, which there is. So I'm going to try to go through the plot chronologically, which is to say reveal everything that the reader and the characters in the novel discover as we're going along. But to try and make sense of it in my head, I'm going to just go through the events chronologically. So the book takes place in 1984 to begin with, or 1Q84. So 1Q84 is the name that Aomame gives to the world that she's in. She realizes at one point she's not in 1984 anymore. She's in 1Q84. So that's how she distinguishes the sort of world line, even though it's not world lines, but the world that she exists in. Tengo uses a different term, uses the term the town of cats. So he reads this short story about this man who gets on a train, gets off at this town that seems deserted, but at night all these cats come out and the cats sort of rule the town. And he then tries to leave the town, but the train never stops and he's never able to pick him up again. And so the town of cats is sort of a metaphor for a sort of a liminal space, a sort of a purgatory, and in between where someone is stuck. They can't get to where they need to go and they can't get back to where they've been to. So the sort of, for Tengo, the term town of cats becomes what he refers to this world as. But it also refers to a certain place in the novel itself that he goes to, a distinct place within this world he refers to as the town of cats. But we'll get to that. So the whole novel starts because of this cult called Sakigake. So Sakigake started out as sort of a commune, a bunch of students led by this one professor who eventually became known as the leader, and he just wanted like a agricultural, non-capitalistic, socialist, communist utopia, and so they set up this commune. Now at some point he starts hearing voices or getting voices, and see, this is where the weirdness comes in. I'm going to try to explain it best I can, but there are these beings called the little people. They're called that because they are little people. They look like normal people, but they're super, super tiny. And they are sort of, I don't know, kami, gods, something, spirits, these sort of beings that for thousands of years have had their will sort of done by kings of the earth that have perceived their voices, and because they perceived the voices of these little people, they became kings and ruled. So these little people have got in contact with the leader of Sakigake, this cult. And because it's a Murakami novel, there has to be a very, very weird sexual aspect to the whole thing. So, in this, not just this cult, but in this whole thing with the little people, there needs to be a receiver and a perceiver. So, the perceiver is the leader, the one that perceives the voices of the little people. But in order to do so, he needs a receiver as sort of a go between the little people and himself. And that is in this book these shrine maidens, these prepubescent girls that through sexual congress with the leader transmit the voices of the little people. So of course, why does it have to be like that? Who knows? It's Murakami. Just to go a bit into the weirdness of his, I don't want to seem like a prude, but the way he writes sexuality to me is so weird. Even the very first page, the first chapter of this book is introducing Aomame, and she's just randomly thinks about this one sexual experience she had with another girl when she was in college, I think, or late high school. Why did she randomly think of this lesbian experience? There's no reason at all in the plot. And the way it's described is such it's written by a 60-year-old man. And to me, this is a 60-year-old man's idea of what teenage lesbian sex is like. And the terms and the body parts described and the feelings, it feels very much like, if not written for the male gaze, then 100% written by a male who has no experience with this whatsoever. It's so, I don't know if it's meant to be titillating, but all of the sexuality in this book is so male focused, even when it is through female POVs. It's bizarre, the focus on very specific body parts. Even at the very end of this book, there's a paragraph that could only be written by Murakami. It's something like Aomame is thinking about these two women in her life who had passed away, and she says she misses them so much. And then the next sentence is, she misses their breasts so much. Their breasts are now gone from this world. Like, what? that. I'd love to hear, maybe I should look up some female perspectives on Murakami novels, because to me it's just absolutely ridiculous and bizarre. Anyway, so we have this weird sex cult where the leader needs to have intercourse with prepubescent girls to hear the voices of these little people. And if that's not weird enough, he sort of justifies it, the author justifies it in that it's not rape, because the leader himself is completely paralyzed at these weird times. He cannot move his body at all, but he has a very strong erection, and during these times the shrine maidens come to him and force themselves on him, and he can't do anything about it, and he doesn't even feel anything. But this sort of sexual congress, I think is the term they use, occurs. And yeah, so the leader's daughter, this girl, Fukada Eriko, she was sort of one of these first shrine maidens, but not really her. So this is another way that he makes it out. Like, these shrine maidens are not really real people. There are these things called dotas. So to make it even weirder, the little people enter into this world. They do so originally through the mouth of a dead goat that Eriko had been looking after and had died. So Fukada Eriko was punished. She was put in this, she's 10 years old at the time. She's locked up in this cabin with the dead goat to sort of reflect on how she didn't look after this goat. Anyways, the little people crawl out of the mouth of the dead goat. That's sort of their tunnel entrance into this world. And then with Eriko, they construct an air chrysalis. What's an air chrysalis? Well, who knows? But they do so by pulling threads out of the air, these little people, and they weave this air chrysalis. And once they finally have finished it, inside this air chrysalis is the Dota, which looks like Fukada Eriko, but is not actually her. It's sort of a weird shadow of her. So the original Fukada Eriko is this thing called a Maza, and the one in the chrysalis is called the Dota. Kind of like mother and daughter, I guess. Anyways, so that happens, and the creation of this Dota is what the little people need to act as a perceiver for the receiver, and it's a whole wild, very weird thing. Anyway, so Fukada Eriko, she runs away when she discovers that she's created this thing, this Dota. She flees the commune and goes and lives with this professor. And she's a very weird person, because I think it's because she's lost part of herself to this Dota that she's sort of very cut off and distant and a very strange individual. 7 years on, the little people are fine. They have their Dota that's having weird congress with the leader in the cult. And at this point, Fukaeri, as she calls herself, writes a novel. And she writes this novel called Air Chrysalis, which is essentially explaining the events of the little people in the Maza and the Dota and the cult, and explaining everything that sort of happened. But she writes it as if it's a fantastical work of fiction and tries to get it published. This editor, Komatsu, sees it and he's like, wow, this beautiful 17-year-old girl. Again, why does she have to be 17? Why couldn't he write her as being 18? But nope, she's 17 and described as being beautiful multiple times. Her breasts are described so many times. Anyway, so this editor sees this work and he's like, I can work with this. We can make a lot of money off of this, but it needs some polishing. So he gets his friend slash employee, this writer Tangle, who's this 30-year-old cram school teacher. He teaches math. He was a math prodigy as a child, but he writes literature in his free time. So Komatsu, the editor, says, hey, Tangle, look, we're going to write this. You're going to rewrite this book, and then we're going to get it published. We're going to say this Fukaeri girl wrote it. We're going to make tons of money. And Tango's like, that's really dishonest and like maybe even criminal. I shouldn't do that. But after reading what Fukaeri had written, he falls in love with the world. He needs to rewrite it. So he rewrites this book. And that sort of brings Fukaeri and Tango together, and they have sort of formed a team to write this book. And it turns out in writing this book, they've sort of somehow have disrupted the little people. So by revealing to the world what the little people are and what they do, even in the form of fiction, it somehow upsets the little people and they can't share their voice with the leader anymore. So after she's written this book, the professor that she's been living with wants to sort of investigate the cult that she had come from, but he can't do so on his own, and the police are sort of reticent to do so. So he's using her writing this book. He's using her sort of fame in writing this book to get the reporters to investigate the cult and figure out what's happened to her family. So because of that, Fukaeri has to sort of disappear to make the investigators, the reporters, really want to dig into the story. And so she ends up living with Tengo for a time. For like 3 months. So while that's all going on, we have this woman, Aomame. So like I said earlier, Aomame and Tango had gone to elementary school together when they were 10 years old. Aomame had been part of this society of witness or something, which I'm not even sure is a real thing or not. It could be. This weird Christian sect that made her very sort of cut off from everyone else. And she never had any friends. No one ever talked to her, but she was being bullied at one time, and Tango came and stood up for her. And Tango is like, he's a really big guy. He's, like I said, a math prodigy, great in sports. He's popular enough that when he stands up for her, like, people step back. And so she really appreciates that from him. And so they had this moment where she never once spoke a word to him, and he never spoke to her outside of that one situation. But a little while later, she ran up to him and held onto his hand, held his hand tight, and they both sort of looked up at the moon and had this moment together. And then she transferred schools and ran away from her family and never saw him again for 20 years. So Aomame grew up to become this sort of a physiotherapist, sports instructor. She's a really sporty person, and she has sort of a tragic backstory where she had this one friend in college who would always fall in love with the worst sort of people, and she lost her virginity by being raped in college. And so Aomame broke into this man's apartment and trashed it, like completely destroyed everything in it and made a huge mess of everything as sort of revenge. But her friend then eventually gets married to this man, and of course it's the same issue. The man's a horrible person and abuses her constantly, physically, emotionally. He's just awful, but he's rich and wealthy, so he can get away with it. So the friend eventually commits suicide, and it's revealed that she was sort of pregnant while she did so. And so Aomame, same thing, she wants to get revenge. She's lost her best friend. So she devises this way to kill him without anyone knowing that he sort of has died of unnatural causes. She develops this sort of ice pick thing that she, because of her super sort of physiotherapist powers, that she can detect different parts of the body and whatnot. She finds the perfect place in the neck and stabs the person with this super thin needle, and it hits a part of the brain that instantly kills someone. But because it's so thin, it leaves no blood, it leaves no trace, and it just seems like a heart attack or something. So she develops this thing and goes and kills her friend's husband. Later, she has these private clients she works with, and she meets this really rich old woman, the dowager she's just called, and she's this bodyguard named Tamura, who's sort of a bodyguard secretary. He's got like a past. He's like yakuza or some sort of underground crime. But this dowager, she runs a safe house for women who's been abused by men, out of her just the kindness of her heart. And it's revealed that her daughter had sort of gone through the same thing that Aomame's friend had gone through, where her daughter had been pregnant and was just constantly abused by this man, her husband, and so she took her own life. And so the dowager then sort of used, because she's very, very wealthy and powerful, she used her power to not kill her son-in-law, but make his life just absolutely miserable. So as they get to know each other, Aomame reveals that she has killed this man to sort of get revenge. And then they sort of develop this weird working relationship where Aomame is an assassin that goes out and murders abusive husbands, people who not just anyone who abuses, but like the worst of the worst, the ones that can't be redeemed. She goes out and kills these people so that the women then don't have to deal with going through a divorce. I mean, in Japan in the 1980s, it's an extremely patriarchal society, so women aren't going to, a divorce isn't really going to help them. It's going to cause them more issues. So Aomame goes out, kills these men. The women get their divorce and their life insurance and can move on with their lives. So she's done that for a few people, and now they find out that, and this is where the connection with the cult Sakigake comes in. So this 10-year-old girl who shows up in the sort of system, and she needs help, and it's revealed that she's been raped multiple times and she had come from this cult, and they sort of find out that it's the leader that's been doing this. Now what they don't know is that this 10-year-old girl is actually a dota, one of the shrine maidens. She's not a real person, she's just sort of a ghost shadow of a person who's been sort of having congress with leader while he's totally paralyzed and has no control over it, whatever. All they see is this 10-year-old girl who's been violently abused. And so they realize this guy's really high profile, this leader. If they're going to kill him, Aomame is going to have to run away. She's going to have to go into hiding. She's going to have to get a new identity. But she agrees. She's sort of got nothing to live for. If she can sort of right this wrong in the world, then it's worth it. So she goes up to the hotel room where the leader is staying. He's got these two bodyguards outside. But she gets in with him and starts speaking to him, and he reveals that, like, he knows everything, basically. He knows all about her, all about Tango, he knows all about the little people and the Mazad and Dota, and he reveals everything to her. And he says, like, I know you came to kill me, and I want you to do it. He's been living in excruciating pain. He's can't escape it. His body's slowly dying. He's not going to last much longer anyways. He's like, if you can just kill me, then that's fine. But the little people aren't happy with this. There's this huge thunderstorm that's going on because of this at this time, and Aomame eventually just kills the man. Meanwhile, back at Tango's apartment, so Fukaeri has been staying with Tango, our leader's daughter, and they then have this sort of weird congress where Tango sort of loses control of his body, and Fukaeri then sort of has sexual congress with him. Again, it's explained in detail that we do not need, but through this act, it's revealed later that with Fukaeri as sort of a weird conduit, Tango and Aomame have conceived a child. So Aomame is now pregnant because of what happened on this night. She finds out, of course, much later. She kills this leader and manages to escape and gets back and flees and gets to this sort of safe house apartment and hides there. The whole time she's been given a gun she was going to use to kill herself if she couldn't get out. But it's interesting. So there's references to Chekhov throughout this, the writer. Tango sort of reads some of Chekhov's writing to Fukaeri. When Tamara gives the gun to Aomame, he references Chekhov's gun and how if a gun is in a piece of literature, it has to be fired at some point. And so they're constantly talking about whether this gun's going to be fired or not, but it's not. It's never fired. So I said that they're in this different world, this 1Q84. Aomame realizes this at some point when she looks up at the sky and realizes that there are two moons up there. There's sort of the Maza and the Dota. For whatever reason, this world is two moons. Tango also starts noticing these two moons, so that tells them that they're not in this world anymore. Aomame thinks she entered this world at the very start of this novel. She gets off the highway, and because she has to rush to meet this client, she's going to kill someone. She goes down this emergency staircase on the side of the highway, and she thinks going down that she entered into this world, this 1Q84. Reading the book, I thought that she had entered the world of the book that Tango had been writing. So Tango had been writing a book about a world with two moons, but this was sort of a reference to Air Chrysalis, the book that he rewrote by Fukaeri, who was telling her story about the cult. And in that world of Air Chrysalises and Mazas and Dotas and little people, there is two moons. So there's sort of perpetually two moons in the sky, but not everyone notices it. Only Aomame and Tengo. I think Leader's aware of it as well, because he sort of knows everything. But when Aomame's in hiding, she sort of gets sick of everything and tries to go back to the top of the highway and find that emergency stairwell and go down it again and to leave the world, but she can't find the emergency stairwell. It's not there. So she takes the gun out, puts it in her mouth, and is going to kill herself, but she doesn't. She decides, she sort of hears on the wind a voice, and she's not sure what it means or what it's trying to say, but she goes back to the safe house apartment. So the voice, I think, was Tengo. So Tengo, meanwhile, has been living with Fukaeri. He, like I said, has this weird town of cats thing where he goes off to stay at the sanatorium where his father has been living, and he has this weird relationship with his father where he doesn't really believe it's his real father, his biological father, but this man raised him, and it's not relevant to the overall plot, I don't think, so I won't get into it. But he reveals to that town where his father's staying as the town of cats, where he sort of goes, and he's not in this world anymore, but he's sort of separate from the world and everything that's going on. And of course, in this final part of the book, Aomame and Tengo are trying to reach out and find one another. And Tengo's apartment and Aomame's sort of safe house are very close by, but because Tengo's currently going to see his father, and there's all these times when they almost see each other, but they don't. So like Tengo will come back, and then he finds out his father has passed away, so then he has to go for the funeral. Then he comes back again. There is one point where Aomame does see him on the playground looking up at the two moons, because he's noticed that now that there's two moons, and that sort of Aomame finally sees him, realizes that he's like still around after 20 years. He can see the two moons, makes the connection that the baby inside her has to be his, even though it's totally illogical. And ever since that point has been waiting for him to show up again. We also have in the final third part this weird sort of third perspective of this guy Ushikawa, who's described as like the ugliest man alive. He's a private investigator hired by Sakigake to hunt down Aomame. He had been the one who had vetted her and said, yeah, she's safe to go give Leader a massage or whatever, and of course got Leader killed. He also had investigated Tengo because of his connection with Fukaeri and the creation of Air Chrysalis. So he's staking out Tengo's apartment because he made the connection between Tengo and Aomame, that they had known each other, and he's thinking maybe there's some sort of connection there. And so he's really close to discovering where Aomame is hiding before even she knows that Tengo's nearby, or Tengo knows that she's nearby. But Aomame spots him. Tamaru, the bodyguard, also had spotted him, and so Tamaru goes and actually kills him, even though he didn't need to be killed. It's pretty gruesome, and the poor guy, you do feel bad for him. But yeah, he's killed. And so eventually, because of this, Tengo and Aomame finally meet, and they finally have that moment where, and it describes something like the 20 years between them sort of vanish, and yeah, so they meet up, and Aomame's plan is to get out of this world, to escape it. Now there is a weird sort of scene where the corpse of Ushikawa, his mouth opens and little people crawl out of it and start creating this air chrysalis with sort of the corpse of Ushikawa somehow involved, but that never really goes anywhere. I guess that's just saying that the little people, even though they've lost and they don't have anyone to sort of hear their voices anymore, they're starting over again. Because at this point, the cult, they don't want to kill Aomame. They sort of think that the child inside of her is the successor to Leader, and so they want her baby. But she realizes this, and she wants to leave this world. So she, with Tengo, she manages to, instead of this time going back to the highway and crawling down the escape, she says, well, no, that's how I got into this world. To get out, I need to do the opposite. So she takes Tengo, and they crawl up the staircase and exit into it's revealed that it's not the original world. They don't go back to 1984. But they're not in 1Q84 either. They're in this third world. This, not like the third world, but they're in another world, a third different reality. But they're okay with that. They're together. She's gonna have his baby, and they're all gonna live happily ever after. So that is the incredibly bizarre plot of 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. I enjoyed it, yeah. It's super, super long. I don't know if I'll ever read it again because it was so long. Now that I've read the longest one, I feel like I can read the other ones that I've yet to read, and then I can say I've read all of his works. There's just something about them that these books are just nice to read, even though they're so weird, and there's like the sexual things about them. It's got a weird sense of sexuality, in my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Anyways, that's 1Q84.